Well, thank you all for coming to the Act 64 Brown Bag Lecture Series. This is our third installment. And today we're going to hear from Padraic Monks in the Stormwater Program about the potentially new Stormwater Permit Threshold. So with that, I'll turn it right over to Padraic.
Thank you, Madeline. Hi, I'm Padraic Monks with the Vermont DEC Stormwater Program. My talk today is on the possibility of lowering the stormwater permit threshold to 1/2 acre impervious surface. Briefly, what I'm hoping to cover is a general overview of stormwater permitting for context as to which permit threshold we're talking about, to cover the existing permit threshold, what's driving potential change to this, including the Lake Champlain TMDL, and Act 64, or the Vermont Clean Water Act, and then finally to discuss what the possible next steps would be, including potential revisions to state statute and rule. First, and briefly, we issue several different types of stormwater permits, including construction permits for projects that disturb more than 1 acre of earth. We have an industrial stormwater program, also called our multi-sector, a municipal program, including the MS4 program, and soon to include municipal roads. We also have a program that addresses waters impaired due to stormwater runoff. And what we're talking about here is our stormwater discharge program, also called our operational stormwater permit or state stormwater permit, and it covers discharges from impervious surfaces. Impervious surfaces are hard surfaces, man-made surfaces that water runs off of rather than allowing water to infiltrate through. Before I jump to that slide, I mean it's the permit threshold's been sort of a perennial topic of conversation. The permit threshold's been changed multiple times. Under the 1980 procedures, 87, 97, and as mentioned, 2004. So it's to some degree an ongoing open question as to what the appropriate permit threshold should be. Most recently, in the context of looking at Lake Champlain and the development of the Lake Champlain TMDL, the issue of what the appropriate threshold and level of treatment should be for stormwater has been very much a topic of conversation. If you've been following the development of the Lake Champlain TMDL or just the state of Lake Champlain in general, you've probably seen this graph or similar ones that show a increasing trend in phosphorus concentrations in the lake. Additionally, if you've been following the TMDL development, you've seen this pie chart that essentially estimates the sources of phosphorus to the lake, everything from stream banks, forest lands, developed lands, and agricultural lands. When we're talking about stormwater and runoff from developed lands in general, what we're looking at and talking about are the upper two slices of pie in the right-hand corner assigned to developed lands, including paved roads and also unpaved roads. Now, unpaved roads were broken out here essentially for modeling purposes, as I understand it. Unpaved roads are also impervious surfaces, and we, here at DEC would essentially lump them all together under the developed lands category. And as you'll see from this pie chart, we're talking about roughly 20% of the phosphorus load into Lake Champlain, and we would expect a similar level of contribution of nutrients to other phosphorus impaired waters in the state, and also just in terms of contributions to waters that are meeting standards. Stepping back to some degree, a little more context on the TMDL, which refers to total maximum daily load. I call it a cleanup plan. I think it's more typically referred to as a pollution diet, and basically it includes allocations, which, as I describe it, are the amount of phosphorus we can have from each of the various sources, and expect to meet the water quality standard for the water in question. In the case of the Lake Champlain TMDL, all of the developed land has been put into the waste load allocation, which is also referred to as point sources. Non-point sources such as agricultural discharges are included in the load allocation. Perhaps most importantly, when we're talking about stormwater and what the permit threshold should be, is the fact that the waste load allocation for stormwater for developed lands includes a future growth allocation. So that what that means is the TMDL looks at, okay, what is the existing contribution from stormwater from developed land? How much does it need to be reduced by in order for Champlain to meet standards? Additionally, the EPA contractors have estimated, based on information we've provided them, what level of growth and increase in phosphorus should we expect from new development, and consequently, how much do we need to reduce phosphorus by, while taking into account future contributions in order to meet standards in the lake. This table right in the middle has developed land, and there's you'll see there's a footnote there, number 2, that the developed lands allocation includes reductions needed to offset future growth. And what that boils down to is that on average we need to achieve a 24% reduction in phosphorus from developed lands in the basin. To my thinking, that's a very significant undertaking, and we've obviously had to describe how we think that may be achieved. As mentioned, we are currently managing about 10% of the impervious surfaces in the Champlain Basin through our state stormwater permits. And also, as mentioned, we've issued about 3,000 permits over 30 years. The question before us now is, how much do we need to manage in order to achieve a 24% reduction? I think it'll be a substantial increase over the 10% that we're currently managing. So how do we do that? As part of the development of the TMDL, we've had to develop a phase 1 plan that identifies the programs that we would implement to implement the TMDL. Once the TMDL is finalized, the phase 1 plan will also be adopted in final form. As part of that phase 1 plan, we identified the range of programs that we intend to implement, including our existing permit programs, which are an important means of minimizing the amount of contributions from future growth. They also provide an important means for addressing existing sources and potentially requiring additional measures to reduce phosphorus from those sites. We also proposed a program that would require existing impervious surfaces of 3 acres or more to be retrofitted where those sites didn't have a permit or were designed to standards before the 2002 Stormwater Manual was adopted. So in those cases, they would need to undertake a feasibility approach where they can put in the best fit stormwater practices to reduce phosphorus from that site. We've also identified a program that could address runoff from municipal roads, paved and unpaved. Additionally, we're working with VTrans to develop what we call a TS4, or Transportation Separate Storm Sewer System permit that would apply to all of VTrans highways and associated facilities statewide to address stormwater and to ensure that VTrans is reducing phosphorus from their facilities consistent with the TMDL. Additionally, we understand that 3 acres is a starting point, and we may in fact need to address existing sites with less than 3 acres of impervious. For example, maybe it's 2-acre sites. An important part of this undertaking and exercise is the cost. The cost for implementing the developed land portion of the TMDL is in easily in the hundreds of millions of dollars. We understand, that retrofitting existing impervious surface, in the existing built environment is substantially more expensive than implementing stormwater controls for new development. So what that means to some degree is, to the extent that new development goes forward without stormwater controls, say for example today, a project with 3 acres of impervious surface, if it were to go forward and doesn't require a stormwater permit, its increase in phosphorus in Champlain and its contributions to impairments or to the degradation of water quality statewide need to be addressed through retrofits to the existing built environment. So essentially any cost gained or saved by that development gets passed on to someone else. So the question to us is, what's the appropriate balance? What's the most equitable and efficient approach? We estimated the number of the increase in projects. We issue anywhere from roughly 150 to 300 operational permits a year. Lowering the permit threshold to a half acre may readily double that permit load. We don't have a great source of data on that, where people that don't need a permit aren't required to report to us on what they're up to. We certainly do see applications for projects that require coverage under the construction general permit, but not an operational permit. So we have a sense of how many of those are going forward without an operational permit. Additionally, VTrans has a good command of the types of projects that they typically permit or typically push forward in a year, and what percentage of those currently require a permit and what may require a permit if the threshold were to be changed. And their estimates are similar to ours in that they would expect roughly a doubling of their projects. So obviously that would be a substantial increase to us. Impacts to the public, of course that means projects that before such a change didn't need a permit would. We estimate roughly that the costs of implementing stormwater treatment and obtaining a permit is roughly $30,000 per acre. We developed that cost estimate quite some time ago, so I suspect it's dated and is probably on the low end of actual costs. But on the other hand, the public obtains the benefit of not having to redress impacts from new development that doesn't have the appropriate level of stormwater controls. We've identified the need for at least 2 staff, 1 technical staff to assist in the review of the new applications, and 1 staff person to assist in the administrative component of these permits. The administrative component is significant with operational permits. These are not one and done type permits. They're required to be, as mentioned, to be kept valid for the life of the project. They require annual inspections, annual reporting, periodic recertification by a designer, typically an engineer, that the system is in compliance. We inspect some percentage of those on an annual basis. And there's ongoing permit fees and permit renewals associated with those. So looking forward, in terms of the next steps, we did submit our report on the 15th of January to the legislature. It's been reviewed by the House Committee on Fish and Wildlife and Water Resources. At this point, to the best of my knowledge, there is not yet a bill that would implement this. If it does go forward, the questions that will come to both the legislature and DEC and the public is, if we are to implement a reduction in the statute, what's the best way to do it? The options would include directly revising the statute to require projects to obtain permit if they are going over the half-acre threshold by a certain date. For example, they can revise Stormwater Statute 10 VSA 1264 to make that change effective July 1st of this year. Alternatively, the legislature can direct us to adopt it by a rule change by a date certain. We're currently directed by Act 64 to update our stormwater rules, I believe by the end of 2017. An additional route would be to have the legislature direct us to adopt a general permit to also implement that change by a certain date. We believe it would be advisable, whether it's implemented by statute or by rule, to provide the public and us at least 6 months lead time. So projects that are in the design phase now won't be caught off guard by a quick regulatory change. It'll provide us the ability to get word out to the public and to our stakeholders to start preparing for this change. We have an additional complicating factor in that our stormwater standards are in the process of being updated, the Vermont Stormwater Management Manual. We've undertaken a stakeholder process. We're in the final weeks of revising that draft to get it to the point where we can provide the public one more pre-rulemaking comment period. We're hoping to do that in early March, so there would be a 30-day period there at least where folks can weigh in and we can make any final revisions before we go to rulemaking, hopefully later this spring. So if we have both the rule influx and the threshold influx, that certainly presents challenges. Well, we can address them, but having a bit of time to do that would be advisable. So that concludes my formal presentation. Hoping we can use the rest of this period to take any questions you have. Thank you.